And next to her is Bob Kent. Bob is also on our, he's one of our HAWA trustees. So he is an unpaid donor of his time for helping us do all the things that we can for the community.
Okay, my name again is Bob Kent, and I'm here to talk about the experience of Algodones. And it's probable that some of the first-time visitors to Courtyard are wondering, what on earth is Algodones and why is everybody always talking about it? Well, the short and simple answer, okay, hope we're communicating now. So as I mentioned, people are always asking, newcomers are asking, what is Algodones and why is everybody talking about it? The one-word answer is savings, big savings. Algodones is a small town or large village just across the Mexican border, which specializes in three things in particular. That is dentists, opticians, and pharmacies. You can often get as much as 2/3 off of the U.S. price by going to Algodones. Yes, that's right. You can get up to 66% discounts on many of the commonly purchased items, which cost a huge amount of money in the U.S. or in Canada. A lot of Canadians you'll see there in the parking lot, Canadian parking lots. They know where the discounts are, believe me. So you might ask, where exactly is Algodones? If you get in your car in the parking lot, and if you drive 93 miles, according to Google Maps, that's 1 hour and 40 minutes, you will arrive in the parking lot just across the border from Algodones. It's very convenient to anybody in southern Arizona or southern California. Believe me, it will, if you have any sort of major expense to pay, it will save you a large amount of money. And how to get there from Quartzsite, you just take Highway 95 south. You go to Yuma, you connect with the interstate, you cross the Arizona-California border, you turn south on Route 186, which passes the Quechon Casino, and a couple of miles down the road is the Mexican border, and you'll see a sign that says parking. And I would advise you to keep your eyes quite alert, because it is possible to overlook that sign and wind up with your vehicle in Mexico, which is not always the optimum situation. So once you get in the Quechon parking lot, they will charge you a fee to park. I believe the minimum is $5. They have a sliding scale. The bigger the vehicle, the more you pay. And another thing to note is it's day use only for parking. They do have a special area set aside for overnight parking, but you have to pay an extra premium to stay there. But not that many people actually stay overnight in Algodones. So you park your car, and I'd advise you, it's a huge parking lot. It gets very, very full. I would advise you to make a note of the lane you're parking in. Every parking lane in the parking lot has large letters on telephone poles. And please make a note of that, because it can be rather difficult to find it when you're coming back. Okay, and so once you leave your vehicle, you walk down a sidewalk, and you go through a one-way revolving door, and that is the Mexican border. Once you pass that revolving door, you are in Mexico, a separate country with its own laws, its own regulations, its own language, its own traditions and customs. And you cannot, I repeat, you cannot cross back into the United States until you go through the U.S. Customs border post, which is fairly close, but as I mentioned, it is absolutely essential. There are no shortcuts to take when you want to come back to the U.S. Now, in terms of do's and don'ts, I do have a few recommendations, and the first is to go early and to leave early. It can get extremely crowded in Algodones. Thousands of people a day go there. So the earlier you go there, the better off you are, and particularly the earlier you leave and cross the border again, the better off you are. Everyone who goes by foot to Algodones has to go through the U.S. Border Customs Post. Sometimes they only have one service officer there, sometimes two, but delays can be extreme if you wait past noon. I've waited as long as 3 hours in line. It's not pleasant. So once again, the earlier you go, the better. The earlier you leave, the better. But there is one advantage to waiting in the line, if you want to call it an advantage, is they expect people to wait their turn. But people who are handicapped, who are on wheelchairs, crutches, or if you're not feeling well, you had a reaction to your medicine or something, if you go to the head of the line and mention this fact to them, they will expedite your passage into the United States, which, believe me, can be a great convenience if you're not feeling well or if you're handicapped. So other notes and hints are, if you call ahead to your dentist to make an appointment, which, as I'll mention later, is not strictly necessary usually, one point to clarify is the time zone they're talking about for your appointment. As anyone knows who's been near the Arizona-California border, time can be very confusing. And when you cross into Algodones, most people come from Arizona, which has its own time zone, into California, which has a separate time zone, into Baja California, where Algodones is. They have their own separate time zone. So when you call your dentist office, if you want to make an appointment, be extremely clear about what time zone they're talking about when they give you an appointment. You don't want to be there 2 hours early or 2 hours late. Okay. One thing to keep in mind is that you do need identification to cross back from Mexico into the United States. When you go through the one-way revolving door into Mexico, no ID whatsoever is required. They encourage people. Of course, tourism and medical tourism is a major support to the Mexican economy. They make it as easy as possible for foreigners to cross the border. But coming back into the United States at the border post, at the customs post, it's an entirely different situation. They will absolutely insist that you have to prove that you really are who you are and that you are a U.S. citizen or a Canadian citizen or someone else who has permission to come into the United States. And before 2001 and the 9/11 event, it was easy to cross the border into the United States using only your driver's license. But they tightened up the restrictions considerably after that. So they strongly encourage all American citizens or Canadian citizens crossing over from Mexico to the United States to have their passport. And of course, a lot of Americans, I suppose, no, Canadians have to have a passport, of course, to get to the U.S., but a substantial number of Americans do not, to this day, have passports. The Customs Service strongly relies on passports. They check each one in a computer, make sure you've got a current passport, there are no warrants out for your arrest, et cetera, et cetera. So, although they encourage passports, there are a certain number of people who to this day do not carry passports and will show the customs agents a driver's license or a birth certificate. The Customs Service is not happy by the fact that people don't have passports, but they generally will accept a driver's license or a birth certificate. They might ask you questions to verify your identity. And I'm told, I do not know for a fact, that for people who try to cross without a passport, they will let you cross perhaps maybe 5 times, but then they become quite insistent that the next time you arrive, you must have your passport. So please keep that in mind. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind is that when you go into Mexico to dentists, pharmacists, or opticians, they want to deal in cash. Very few of them ever accept credit cards because they have no way of enforcing U.S. credit card laws in Mexico, and they often insist that you pay in cash. And before you cross the border, there is an ATM machine right at the border on the American side. Personally, I'm rather skeptical of ATM machines. They have been known to be hacked or otherwise compromised. And I think a good way to get cash, if you really need it, is coming in to the Algodones border on Route 186. You pass the Quechan Casino, which is an Indian tribe casino in California, and they have several ATM machines. And I'm no authority, but I assume their security is a lot better than the open ATM machine sitting on the border itself. So when you go to Algodones, it's important to know, if you can, in advance, what dentist you're going to or what optician or pharmacy you're going to. And the most important of these three is the dentist. And it's a rather tough question to know in advance, if you've never been there before, which dentist to go to. I looked up in the directory and there are 300 dentists in Algodones within just a few square blocks. It's really an amazing sight to walk in and see dentists and nothing but dentists, every other street sign you pass. And there are various ways to determine a good dentist to go to. When you pass the border, there will be plenty of people speaking fluent English who will tell you that they represent the best dentist in the world, and they will be glad to, for free, to take you to that dentist's office. Well, of course, these folks are getting a subsidy from the dentist under the table when they actually take someone to that dentist's office. So I would advise you to please do your research before you cross the border to know where you're going. And there are several ways to do this. I think one of the best ways is, if you know someone who's been to Algodones previously, to ask them, what dentist do you recommend? And there's nothing like personal experience to find out good information. Other possibilities, if you don't know anyone who's been to Algodones, is to look at an online directory. But one thing to keep in mind, I hope I'm not shocking anyone here, is you cannot always rely on the information you see on the internet. I don't want to disillusion anyone, but the internet has its faults, and one of them is publication of false and contradictory information. So you'll find several directories listing dentists, pharmacies, and opticians in Algodones. But the problem is that they're all subscription databases. So those folks are paying the directory to list them as one of the best dentists or pharmacists in Algodones. It may or may not be true, so I encourage you to actually look for alternative sources. So if you don't have a friend who's been to Algodones who cannot recommend anyone, another alternative is to place a question on the numerous Nomad forums which exist. There is the old cheap RV living forum, which has now changed its name. It's anyone know the name of that forum these days? Nomad. Yeah, so you still put in the old name. The new forum with its new name will pop up, and ask people, could you please recommend from your personal experience what are the best dentists, pharmacies, and opticians in Algodones. You don't want to hear from people who heard from their cousin's uncle's brother-in-law. You want to know people who have personal experience. Another good forum are the Facebook forums, such as Nomads Helping Nomads, Meet in Queue. There are numerous forums you can ask for. Okay, so once you've done your research, you've crossed the border, you know where to go, you're all set. And if you're, of course, you're in a new town, you're not sure where things are, it's not a bad idea to ask for the many people at the border offering to take you places, to take you to the dentist's office if you tell them which one you're going to. As I mentioned, do not let them take you to just any dentist office. You need to know in advance which one you want to go to. Another thing to keep in mind is that you do not need prescriptions in Mexican pharmacies. You can walk into a pharmacy and ask for any drug you want. Now, the drawback to that is that you need to know in advance the exact name and spelling of the drugs you are looking for. It might be a good idea, if you already are taking prescriptions, to bring an empty box with your pill box or whatever, or to look on the internet and carefully write down the name of the drug you're looking for. As we all know, some of those drug names are rather long and complicated. Don't want to make mistakes. Another thing to remember about entering Mexico is that they have very, very, very strict laws about bringing firearms or ammunition into the country. On the road into Algodones, you'll see numerous signs saying bringing firearms or ammo into Mexico is strictly prohibited. It is not a joke. They are very serious, and you do not want to be arrested for taking firearms or ammunition into Mexico. People have been sentenced to very long prison sentences for this when they forgot to remove 2 bullets out of their pocket when they crossed the border. It's not a pleasant situation, so please be careful. Okay, so I know from experience that when people ask about Algodones, there's a long list of questions they ask. And so, in advance, I'd like to go over a few that I'm sure are on people's minds here. And then one question people ask is Algodone is safe? In my experience, and the experience of many, many people, is yes, it is a very safe place to go. The Mexican economy depends on tourism and on commerce, people crossing the border, and Algodone is flooded, and I mean flooded, with police agents, uniformed and undercover. And they do not like anyone messing with a tourist, so they will definitely come to your aid if you need assistance. But I've never heard of anyone having any crimes committed against them in Algodones. I'm sure there are exceptions, but I just am not aware of it. Okay, do I need an appointment to go to my dentist? And in general, in my experience, the answer is no. They welcome people coming across the border, and if you know where you're going and you go to the dentist's office, they will welcome you, fill out a new patient form, and they will let you know how long you need to wait, if you need to wait. In my experience, especially over the last 2 years with COVID, Algodones has been sharply hit by a reduced number of people crossing the border. So some dentists actually stay at home until they receive a call from their office saying, we have a new patient here, and they will be there in 10 minutes. They're very diligent about assisting patients. Okay, and do I need a prescription? I mentioned this, that you do not need a prescription from Mexican pharmacy. People often worry about that because it's very different from our system, but in Mexico they are very, very open about just walking in and asking what you need. Another question people ask is, do I need to speak Spanish? The answer is no. The large majority of the professionals you deal with in Algodone speak fluent English. And with regard to qualifications, many of the dentists in Algodone are Mexican citizens, but many of them actually graduated from American dental schools. And they speak English better than some Americans I know, as a fact. Occasionally you will meet an office assistant or someone who doesn't speak much English, but you will not be communicating with them because the dentist will be speaking to them exclusively in Spanish. The dentist will talk to you in fluent English. Okay. And so when you're walking back across the border with your prescriptions, there are some things you want to know. People ask, what drugs can I carry back? And the answer is you can carry almost anything. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but there is a certain class of drugs. I think they're called class 3 drugs in the United States. These are heavy narcotics related to things like methadone or heroin derivatives, which are banned from bringing across the border into the United States. So ask the pharmacist if you need to know whether it's legal or illegal to bring back. Now, we discussed dentists, so I'd like to discuss opticians and pharmacists. Now, most of the people crossing the border, when you cross it, one of the first buildings you see is a giant purple building, which has in big letters written on it, Leakey's Purple Pharmacy. That's Liquis. They are the largest pharmacy in Algodones, and they get a large percent of the trade of people coming across the border. It's literally steps across the border. And they're fluent in English. They know exactly what you're looking for, although they will suggest generic drugs when those are common and available. And there are numerous pharmacies on every little street corner in Algodones. I personally deal strictly with Leakey's. I do not deal with the smaller ones. When you go to a dentist, sometimes they will suggest that you go to a certain pharmacy because the world, its reality being what it is, they probably receive a subsidy from the pharmacy. I can't guarantee that, but it's a possibility. So I deal with Leakey's. In terms of opticians, you also see numerous opticians. They're second only to dentists and pharmacies in Algodones. And I'm sure there are many reputable opticians in Algodones. Personally, I deal with the largest optician you'll see. Again, you'll see it immediately crossing the border, this gigantic building with Mendoza Optical sign, M-E-N-D-O-Z-A. I have dealt with them exclusively myself, and I found them to give excellent service, often in 24 hours. You have a complicated prescription. It isn't unusual for them to say, you know, this is a very unusual prescription, but if you come back in 24 hours, we will have it here. You can actually verify that. You can call them before you cross the border. And I would suggest doing that. The same with the dentists. They'll often do caps, for example. They will often promise you that they will have them for you within 24 hours. Now that is fast service. Now it's a complicated case. They might tell you they might take longer. And with my glasses, I have such terrible eyesight. It took them actually 3 weeks to get mine. But I think they actually had to have the lens prepared in Italy of all places. But anyway, that's very unusual. Okay, so people ask, what limits are there in terms of quantity when I bring drugs back from the border? And again, I am not a lawyer. I've read online that some people, you can say you can bring 60 days prescription worth of pills back, others say 90 days. And you will often be questioned by the U.S. border agent. They will ask, what did you buy in Mexico? And most of the people will say, I bought drugs. They might ask you what kind of drugs you buy. And generally, they do not look at the drugs. It's very unusual they will look. As I mentioned, if you mention one of these, I believe they're called class 3 drugs, like methadone or something, that sets off their alarm bells. They don't like to hear that word. They will look for the drugs to see what's there. And I would suggest that when you buy the drugs in the pharmacy, they'll put it in often a purple bag, especially leakies, and that lets the U.S. border agents know that you've been to the pharmacy and you bought something there. That reassures them that you're legit, you're not trying to smuggle anything back. Another way to make sure you get the right things, as I mentioned, is to, when you cross the border, is to carry an empty pill box of what you are accustomed to receiving in the U.S. And again, that will spare you from buying the wrong things at a drugstore. Okay, so I think we've discussed the basics of Algodones, an amazing resource, just 90 minutes away, and I guarantee you will save a vast amount of money when you buy that.
Thanks, Bob. I have a question. Can you use, do you have to get Mexican currency or can you use U.S. currency?
They strongly encourage using only U.S. currency. I'm sure they would take Mexican currency, but they adore those U.S. dollars.